The first presentation is by Alexander Pfeiffer, who is the former head of the Center for Applied Game Studies at Donau Universität Krems in Austria. And currently he's the recipient of a Max Kade Fellowship awarded by the Austrian Academy of Science to work at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the well-known MIT, in the Department for Comparative Media Studies and Writing. And his talk is about kind of new definition of the term gamification. Okay, the stage is yours, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Heinrich, for the introduction. So good morning and welcome to our talk, Beyond Classical Gamification, in and around gamification for education, at the 19th European Conference on e-learning in, unfortunately, virtual Berlin. Heinrich introduced already myself, thank you for that. But my colleagues in regards to writing this paper are Stephen Betziner from the Ministry of Education in Malta, Nikolaus König from Danube University Krems, and Simone Kriegelstein from the University of Vienna and the Austrian Institute of Technology. Before we start with actually discussing the term in and around game gamification, we have to speak a bit more generally about gamification and game studies. I think that we can all agree that we live in a ludic society. This means that games and play are an important part of our society, and that the discussion about what games and play mean for us has been going on for 100, if not more than 1,000 years. This also includes defining game and play, and to shorten this discussion a bit for us, I would simply like to refer back to a statement by Daniel Gringiel, who says, freely translated, everything is a game that is perceived by someone as such. However, I would like to introduce my favorite definition. This one is from the philosopher Bernhard Suitz, and he says, playing a game is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And I think here we are getting a little bit closer to why gamification, and here we have to emphasize, when used properly, can be a powerful tool. At this point, we also have to go briefly into play and game. Play is the playful process. You as a person can also take a playful stance, while game is the environment in which you play, or with which you play. Most of the time we talk about purposely designed game environments, like a game board, a tennis court, or a digital game. Nevertheless, it is very important to always separate these two terms to some extent in order to show that play can also take place outside a game. And if you take a closer look at the term game, you will find that games no longer need a fixed set of rules, a consensus of the player, or player seems sufficient. Goals can also be defined with yourself or among yourself and your co-players. Alternate reality games can integrate players into a game without them even being aware of it. Feedback may not be evident, but above all, games used in teaching or in the world of work question the aspect of voluntariness. So a lot of things changed in the discussion the last decade. And of course, over the years, many different terms have appeared and disappeared in relation to games and play in the educational context. And you can say that some terms have changed simply for marketing reasons. For example, the change from educational games to serious games. But I would like to separate the term serious games and gamification explicitly because they're often mixed up widely. Serious games were created as an executable game with the purpose to teach a certain learning content. Executable means this is a board game, an app on a smartphone, or an exe file on your PC. Whereas gamification is a second layer of game mechanics that can be applied for different purposes and in different areas, but we will get to this later. Another difference is which transfer can or should take place with each option. Serious games as a standalone and mostly self-contained game environment, which, as mentioned, were developed with the specific goal of communicating a particular topic, are therefore especially well suited for explicit knowledge transfer. And serious games can also optimally place the player in a specific role. What does it mean to be in a certain situation? What does it mean to work in a specific field? What does it mean to have only limited options? Gamification, in turn, is more likely to pass on values and change behavior. As a typical example, health is important in our society, so the gamification would nudge you to please walk 8,000 steps every day to remain healthier. If gamification is intended to trigger a long-term behavioral change and is therefore not only intended for a temporary activity, then one thing is absolutely essential. The change must be strong enough to create habits for the player or the group of players within the gamification. In terms of game mechanics, there are several that can be used for gamification purposes. And already from the pure use of points, a gamification in the form of pointification, as Stampfl puts it, can be conducted. But there are some other important aspects to consider: objectivity, transparency, community aspects, and above all, where possible, a successful narrative. And this all plays an important role in the success of the gamification measure and the acceptance by the target group. Now let's look at one of the most common definitions of gamification, which is the one of Deterding. It is already from the year 2011, and it is optimal to quickly point out the topic of gamification. He says, gamification is an informal umbrella term for the use of video game elements in non-gaming systems to improve user experience and user engagement. Unfortunately, most of the time when someone is referring to Deterding, an essential part of his definition is ignored, which is improving the user experience and the user engagement. On the other hand, this definition includes a part, and this is the use of video game element in non-gaming systems. That will probably have to be reconsidered now in the year 2020. We, the authors, assume that gamification can also be used in and around games, and very, very successfully there. However, this was probably not as noticeable in 2011 as it is today in 2020. This aspect has been especially noticeable in the results of my PhD dissertation at the University of Economics, Vienna, entitled Approaching a Ludic Society, which I finished 2 years ago. And one of the findings was the following possible definition of gamification, which I called the version 0.8 of my definition attempt. So 2 years ago, I said gamification is the application from gaming mechanics as further dimension within games, digital games, serious games, or any real-world task as a maybe non-gaming environment. This definition was a clear recommendation, so to say, to myself to take up this topic as a future research, which is what we as a research group have tried for this conference paper. In order to investigate this particular aspect further, we have conducted 8 expert interviews. The goal was to discuss the concept itself of in and around game gamification, to collect examples, and finally to ask the question how this special form of gamification could be used in education. Here you can see a list of our experts. All of them have a strong games research background or are working as a practitioner in the industry. One example which was mentioned immediately was collecting the red flags in Assassin's Creed Part 1, which was not connected to any quest and you only got an achievement. It is said that there was a boost in the Xbox version, a small game advantage, but that's basically it. So you were just running around in the first Assassin's Creed collecting these red flags and you really did not know why. A wonderful example of wide wide-ranging in-game gamification is League of Legends. Here is a screenshot from an older version, which shows the elements in a graphically beautiful way. The players get scores, there are progress bars, there are items to collect outside the actual game, and in turn, you get items like skins. A mixture of in-game gamification and collecting games outside the actual core game loop kept the community happy. According to the experts, League of Legends is an absolute best practice example, not only in the area of in-game gamification, but also in how to make a fair, free-to-play game where it is impossible to earn game benefits with money. This just mentioned as a side note. World of Warcraft also introduced in-game gamification more than a decade ago. There are badges and achievements for things that have nothing to do with the game core loop, quests or NPCs. Often you get these badges unintentionally. Sometimes you actively look for them, ask for the reason, an expert gives a concise answer, the reason why Blizzard implemented in-game gamification. For World of Warcraft and other subscription-based games, this was a cost-saving way to keep players in the game and keep paying the monthly subscription fees without any major updates relating to the backstory or narrative of the game. So it was very easy to implement in-game gamification to keep the players busy while working on the core content in the background for the next big update. FIFA and other electronic arts sports games have various in-game gamification measures. There are levels, points, and with FIFA Ultimate Team, additionally gold, plus a payment currency, the FIFA points, with which you can buy packages that may contain better players. FIFA has reacted well to the criticism of the last years, and you can meanwhile earn a team while playing only a few hours. At Pokemon Go, the expert discussion was very fascinating. Pokemon Go has collecting as its core mechanic, but still the results of collecting are displayed again as badges and achievements. Now you can discuss if this is an in-game gamification or just a way to display the progress of the game. In-game gamification can also be applied to board games. A good example is the board game Gretel, which won in the category Serious Board Games at the European Conference on Game-Based Learning in 2014, which was also in Berlin. In this educational game, there were extensive gamification measures for individual players and the group of players in addition to the actual game as an effective motivational measure. In the discussion about gold passes, as known from Clash of Clans or Rocket League, the expert's opinion was like this, that the gold passes present themselves more of a hybrid between a quest and an in-game purchase, but they're not perceived as in-game gamification. Another form of gamification or in-game gamification is with slot machines, as in the game Castle Builder. There, if a brick appears, a castle can be constructed. The castle is built, and a prince can be chosen by the player to bring a dowry for the princess, which he marries. The prince, not the player. If you have built a lot of castles, you get badges and achievements in your player profile. This example shows that the gambling industry uses game mechanics from gamification where it is legally allowed. At the same time, again as a side note, the classic gaming industry borrows nowadays a lot from the gambling sector. But gambling is a good transition to the term around the game gamification. In some casinos in Las Vegas, you always get points when you play, no matter if you win or lose. These points can be placed in separate slots to win prizes. You can also buy these points, but never pay them out in cash. Around the game gamification is used here to keep the players in the flow.
Alexander, 1 minute, please.
We also know around the game gamification from different platforms like Steam, where you get achievements and badges, the PlayStation Network, or the Xbox. But there are also other around the game gamification mechanics, like from Niantic Wayfarer. When you're level 40, you can suggest Pokestops, and this is a gamified process itself. Or, for example, from games like League of Legends and the Tribunal. where you can rate if someone said something bad in the chat. Two explicit use cases for the educational sector. One would be that you can use platforms like the toolkit Game-Based Learning. And here you can create didactical educational frameworks around the games. So you can create your own gamification framework around any kind of game. Or for example, as it is used in the next esports league in Austria, in Vienna, where we created quizzes around the learning content in school. And the team that wins the quizzes gets a bonus, for example, selecting the play mode in FIFA. To sum up, in-game gamification are game elements with digital games that are not actually directly related to the story or the actual game mechanic. An expert also suggested the term intra-game gamification. Around game gamification are game elements, especially badges, points, and achievements, for which a game must be played, but the results are not displayed in the game itself, but on an external platform. This could be also called extra game gamification. So to come up with the final suggestion of a new definition, gamification is the intention to use of game mechanics as a further dimension within and around both gaming and non-gaming contexts in an endeavor to nudge or motivate participants, which can be only a single player or yourself, to perform certain actions by adopting a playful attitude and or enhancing the user experience. And as a last sentence, nudges can be seen here also in form of gamification, in-game gamification, that this kind of gamification helps you to explore something in the game you would not have otherwise. So thank you very much, and I'm ready for questions. I think we have 3 minutes left.
Thank you, Alexander. This was a very interesting talk, and I liked it very much. And so it was a pity to interrupt you. So are there any questions? So probably can raise your hand.
You have my contact data on the screen, so if anything comes up later, please connect with me on ResearchGate or write me an email, follow me on Twitter, and we can chat there. Maybe if something comes up later today. Okay,
one question. How do you see the impact of your new definition? Does this definition help to deal with games? For example, if game developers talk to each other, or does this categorization of in-game and around-game gamification have impacts on game effects itself?
I think that the industry and what we do is changing rapidly, especially the last 10 years. So we researchers have to be aware that new things come up, and then we have to explore what does it mean for us, what does it mean for society. In regards to this in-game gamification, we already say that most of the gamification approaches do not work if we refer to the classic definition of Deterding. But what most of us did not look at the moment is that there were really a lot of successful gamification approaches, but they are actually, as I just described, happening in the world of gaming. And game designers are for sure aware of that, especially game designers from League of Legends, Pokemon Go, and so on and so forth, who are already doing this kind of gamification. But I'm sure that if we educate new game designers, this is something we have to show them and nudge them how those things work. So I think that as the original definition was already from 2011, I'm going to propose something new. But of course, it depends on the community. It depends on you as colleagues and researchers and teachers, if you share my opinion and my definition or not, or if it was at least an inspiration to look a little bit further than from these definitions we learn from the game studies books.
One quick question by Alf Inge Wang. Isn't it a kind of an oxymoron to discuss gamification in games?
No, not because it's, as I said, it's a second layer within the game, and it is important that it has nothing to do with the game core loop. So if you play World of Warcraft, you have the game, the quests, the storyline on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have the second layer within the game World of Warcraft, where you suddenly get achievements or badges, for example, for collecting cats. So if an NPC would tell you, you have to collect all the cats because this NPC needs the cats because he is hungry or whatever, or he loves cats, maybe that's the better option, then it would be part of the game core loop. But in this particular case, it's just a piece of graphic in a database that if you collect all the cats, maybe suddenly it popped up that you are now the cat collector, or you get a badge in your profile. So this is the in-game part. And then the around the game part would be that you open the Steam where you purchase the games, and then you click on I like to play World of Warcraft, and then there you see a badge that you have collected all the cats. And sometimes you have this feeling, what the fuck, I really did not know that I had to do this. So in the interviews, also the experts said from their experience that most of the players are really surprised when they get additional achievements. But on the other hand, there is a small amount of players looking, and they are really keen on going for these achievements. And as our expert number 5 stated, and he is a real expert from the gaming industry, he said this is just a cost safety measure. So if you have 10-15% already in the end game of your game, and it is so expensive to create new dungeons and new bosses, and then they simply came up with this in-game gamification, trying to create new tasks, while one of the story developers was taking a shower and he came up with something new to collect, and then he entered the database, you have to collect all the cats, pressed enter, and the players were busy again trying to collect those cats without having to write a story and a narrative in the game, which would take him much more time. So on the one hand, some players love these new mechanics and like to share it. And on the other hand, it's keeping the players busy and it's not doing any harm.
Okay, thank you. There is a further question by Martin Steinicke, but I suggest that you
I can answer it in the chat.
Yes. And so we go to the, thank you again, Alexander.
Thank you.